Hello and welcome to the virtual Craft Distilling Expo. Very excited to have Bert with us to talk about ethanol and neutral spirits. This is the pre-recorded section. There will be a live section which is going to be at 12:30 UK time, and that's going to be on Friday the 16th of October. So you can watch this and then join us for a live Q&A with Bert. And without any more of ado, I will hand over to Bert. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. When we first discussed the presentation about ethanol, I thought, yes, indeed, it's probably a good idea because I get a lot of questions about ethanol day to day. I'm with Ethimex, which stands for Ethanol Import Export, and we are involved in quite a few operations to do with ethanol. Part of the business is global trading. Then we have distribution in the UK and Europe as well. And then we also have aging Scots in Scotland, and then some bourbon in Kentucky. And we also deal in both botanicals and barrels, used barrels, that is. From my side, I'm looking after the UK operation, which is mostly importing, bulk break, and then this distribution. First of all, in the presentation, we'll have a look at the larger picture of ethanol, more the global side, what happens around the globe with ethanol, where does it come from, etc. And then we'll zoom into the macro level all the way down to the molecules and see what that means for a distiller in his day-to-day job. I'll try to cover all the questions that I normally get through my work, but if there's something that you feel is missing or not clear, please do ask. I don't mind if it's on or offline, but we can deal with these questions. So I hope you'll enjoy the presentation or at least find it useful. Let's go straight in. There we go. The first obvious question is, what is ethanol? Well, ethanol belongs to the group of alcohols, and it can be made from pretty much anything that has sugar in it. So you can see a whole list of products. We call these feedstock. I would say for the UK, the most popular is wheat. We also see a lot of cane, potato, grapes. Yeah, these are the four most popular. One I want to pick out here is whey. Whey in fact is a byproduct of cheese production. Whey contains about 45% lactose, and that's enough to start fermenting and to produce ethanol. Notice the header, it says agricultural ethanol. There are more styles of ethanol. I will cover these for completion, but won't go too much in detail about these. So first of all, we have synthetic ethanol. This is mostly used for industrial applications, also called anhydrous ethanol, which means there's very little water in there. I won't dwell on this. Another one, cellulosic or advanced ethanol, is a newcomer in the group. It's very, very interesting. Quite a complicated process to extract the ethanol from these materials because they go all the way down to the cellulose in the fibers. So now you might wonder why bother with this kind of high-tech extraction of ethanol while there's other crops available. Well, these are made from waste products like the rice straws or the corn cobs that you can see, and other products that don't need as much water or fertilizers as other food products, and they can be grown on land that otherwise would be not be able to use for these purposes. So looking at the different types of ethanol, where do they all come from? And here we have a spread of the origin of the ethanol, and you can see the world market is completely dominated by the US and Brazil. I'm not sure if you can see this on your screen, but there's a small section, the green section. The third producer is Europe, which represents probably about 5%. And if you can see, they're completely dwarfed by these two giants, US and Brazil, and then you can understand why the EU is so keen to protect the ethanol production within Europe. Looking at the volumes, the global production approaching 30 billion gallons per year. That's a lot of ethanol. But in fact, very little is for beverage. If we now have a look at the spread of the use, you will see on the left side, on the left the left graph, that the vast majority is used for fuel ethanol. And if you hear in the news about E5, E10, and now there's also talk about E20, this will influence this graph immensely. As you can see, the growth of the non-beverage, or the non-fuel ethanol has been slowly and steady. which has been completely overtaken by the fuel. In the right graph, you can see that divides ethanol mainly in fuel and non-fuel, and then the non-fuel is then subdivided into industrial ethanol and potable ethanol. And potable ethanol, that's where we come in. That's where the beverage also sits. It's not just beverage, it's also food. But you can see only a very small percentage, 5.4% of the total ethanol that is produced is for beverage and food. At Etimex, we follow the markets, the fuel ethanol markets, but also the feedstock markets. So that means the grain, the wheat, the barley, corn, cane, etc. Because it's important to understand, for us, it's very important to understand the evolutions on these markets, because eventually they will influence quite directly the availability and the pricing of the beverage alcohol. Now, talking about these feedstocks, let's have a look how they are used across the ethanol. There you go. We've basically got a division between sugar and non-sugar, or sugar and starch. And if you would draw a line on the globe, not quite the equator, probably more close to the Tropic of Cancer line, anything below that line would be sugar. So the ethanol is produced there would be sugar, and the more north you go, the more the wheat and the starch and the grain will come into play. Please note that corn is also being classed as a grain. So if you have GNS, mixed GNS, it might also contain corn unless it's specified otherwise. You can also see a very small entrance of the advanced ethanol. It's very small at the moment, but if it appears on this graph in absolute numbers, it's quite big. And I think in the future, we will see this category growing quite significantly. So this was very briefly the macro vision of ethanol. Let's now go down to the smaller parts, to the molecules, and see what effect these have on our daily lives. So first of all, the ethanol molecule, I'm not going to dwell on this, but the most important thing here is that you notice that there's an OH group. This is very important because it makes ethanol really friendly with water. That means we can dilute it as much as we like. We can go to any ABV, and that's really great news for the distillers and for the beverage industry. At the same time, these ethanol and water molecules like each other very much, and they form water bonds or hydrogen bonds. And they have a few consequences that that we have to be aware of. And let's have a look at them. And one of these effects, because of this bonding, is contraction or shrinkage. What happens in shrinkage is that the volume seems to change when we add ethanol, high-strength ethanol and water. So I want to illustrate it with two live examples. One is how to make gin from a concentrate. So we got the formula from a supplier. And if you add up the ingredients, the liquid ingredients, you think, hold on a minute, something is not quite right, because we got the formula for 100 liters and the ingredients add up to 102 liters. So there's something happening that is not logical, if you can say that way. Another example is diluting high-strength ethanol to a lower strength. And again, we have the absolute volumes in liter ethanol, demineralized water, and then we add them up. But actually the blend, the mix, will be a lot less. Okay, so what happens here? This is quite a good representation, I think. We see the bucket of ethanol and water. We mix them together. And you would expect if you mix 1 liter with ethanol and 1 liter of water, you're going to end up with 2 liters. Makes sense, right? But in this case, it doesn't, because the smaller molecules of the water sit in between the larger ethanol molecules, and they make, on top of this, they make very strong bonds. So they are packed quite densely together. We also, while we're mixing, we have a release of a little bit of heat. Best way to describe this, maybe a bit simplistic, is imagine you have a bucket of sand and you start adding water. So the bucket of the volume will stay pretty much the same, but the weight will go up. The bucket will get heavier. And that's what's happening also with the ethanol. So what happens is the density will increase. So the mix will be denser than the individual components put together. Now, if we look at the density for ethanol at different ABVs, interestingly, this is not a linear event. I'll try to get the next slide up. There we go. So here we go. We got the slide on the graph on the right side. You would expect that you go from water at say 1,000 kilograms per cube to ethanol 789 in a straight line, but no. we actually have a curve, and the curve will be up highest at about the middle. Simple example will illustrate this. So if we have the density of the solvent and the water, we add them together, mix the 50%, you will expect to be bang in the middle, but in fact, as we can see, the observed ethanol at 50% is 0.914, while we're expecting 0.894. So now, how important is this effect? And this graph gives you a nice illustration what happens. The shrinkage is most at 50%, but it's also quite significant between 20 and 70% ABV. And this is exactly where we as distillers are going to operate. So it's quite important to have an understanding of this, and also to be able to estimate what volumes you're going to end up with when you start mixing different alcohols at different strengths. So let's look at the formula. This is a formula on the top that you can use in Excel. You can paste and copy it. I'll put a little example on the left side as well. What we do in this formula actually is we're looking at a high strength ethanol, and then we calculate how much water would be needed to bring it down to the level that we want it to. And then we take away the water that is already in the high strength ethanol. That's what the formula works out. So then you will have a theoretical volume of water that you will add. Total volume that you will have is the original volume plus the water. And then as a guideline, I would say take away 2%, and that will be roughly your estimated value of volume of ethanol or ethanol water mix that you're going to have left. Now, it's still important to measure this, because as we see later, there's also a temperature factor that is in play that I haven't mentioned yet. So indeed, measuring ethanol or measuring alcohol is a very important issue, and there are various methods which I will address now. Classic method is probably using the hydrometer, also called alcohol meter. That's only the case if there is calibration for alcohol, for ABV alcohol. Now, mind you, this calibration will also have a temperature attached to it. So what happens if you heat up the ethanol, the hydrometer will drop lower in the ethanol, and it will appear as if there is more ABV or more alcohol strength in the mixture than you would expect. So in that case, you have to make a correction. Now, talking about corrections and temperature and density, there's a few elements that we have to take into account. Remember this graph that I just showed you a few slides ago about contraction at the highest at 2.2% at 50% ABV. Now, this was for 20 degrees Celsius. Now, there's a different graph for each temperature. And also keep in mind that if you're mixing two liquids, each of a different temperature, the mixture will have a different temperature again. So you have to take this into account. And not only will the density change with ABV, but also with temperature. So you see the curves on the right side. If you look at the whole slide here, you can't see one straight line. So it means nothing is linear, and that's quite important to realize. And because of this, we're going to have to use correction graphs or correction tables. And this is where we come to the practical alcohol tables published by the EU. It's quite an intimidating set of books. There are 3 volumes that we use, and if you have seen this in print, you will realize these are the size of dictionaries. They're also available online as a PDF. So I'll put the link here on the slide so you can have a look for yourself. But basically, what they do is they show the relationship between temperature, density, ABV, and volume. It's a very useful book to use or to understand how to use when you're mixing or blending different liquids together. Let's have a look inside, and let's look at a few examples. This, for example, is a very large table covering hundreds of pages, and it describes the relationship between density, temperature, and ABV. So if you have 2 of these, you can work out the 3rd one. So another table that we use quite frequently or refer to is gives you the equivalent volume at 20 degrees Celsius of a certain volume of ethanol water at the starting temperature. So an example where we would use this is, for example, say we have a tanker of ethanol shipped from the south of France. It's filled at 22 degrees, leaves late afternoon, then travels all the way to Liverpool overnight. And when it arrives early in the morning, 8 o'clock, the temperature is 11 degrees. Now the volume has changed. So what happens is from, say, the 25,000 liters, several hundreds of liters are gone. The volume is not the same anymore. So it's important for the receiver to understand, okay, I'm not going to look at the volume, but I'm going to look at the volume of pure alcohol. So that's why we work in LPA, or liter pure alcohol, at 20 degrees. So we always convert to 20 degrees Celsius. So we're talking about the same thing. We can compare apples with apples and not with pears. So this can cause quite a bit of confusion. And quite often this comes up in conversations with distillers, with customers, with suppliers. So it's quite good to have an understanding, at least to have seen this and be aware of the existence, so you can look into it a bit further if you have not read, if you have not already. There are other reasons to measure alcohol accurately. First one is taxation. As we all know, the duty on alcohol is very high, so it's important to be accurate. You don't want to pay too much. At the same time, you don't want to underpay, so you don't get into any trouble. I just briefly touched on the LPA concept, the liter pure alcohol, also mentioned as LAA, liter absolute alcohol. This is not the volume. This is literally the alcohol that's in your liquid. Very useful to use this concept in pricing for various reasons. First of all, as I mentioned, filling at different temperatures. We're looking at the LPA, not at the actual volume, but also if you buy an undiluted product, the ABV might vary from batch to batch. In the case of ethanol, the variation is rather small. Say it's 96.3, 96.4, 0.5, but there will be a small variation, and that's important. Then it's important that you talk about the LPAs and not about the physical volumes in liter. And you can imagine some people do get confused. If you get a quotation, it says the price is LPA minimum 96%, you're going to start calculating, oh yeah, 96%, but it's minimum 96%. Then you might have a pro forma invoice if you're paying up front. This is then based on an estimated LPA from what we know the batch quality will be, and also the temperature correction factor is applied, so we know that volume. And finally, when you get the invoice, you might see a different number again. This will then be shown as it is on the bonded warehouse documentation, the EAD or the W5 if you pay duty up front. But in reality, the fact is that no one, the supplier nor the government, can charge you more for the alcohol than you actually are getting. And that's why it's important to understand this LPA concept, because it circles all around this this unit, if you like, and it's a fair way to do things as well. Then TFC, I just mentioned that briefly. Then blending, of course, it's important to understand and to make accurate calculations to make your blendings, especially if you're blending two or more products together. Then it's good to have an estimate beforehand and not just try an error and say, okay, a bit more of this, bit more of that. That's good. That might be quite time consuming and might lead to errors as well. So, ethanol-water. I cannot talk about ethanol without mentioning the azeotrope. I don't want to dwell on this, but I would like to move on to the spec sheets now and to look at the impurities of the ethanol. But first of all, we have to understand where these impurities or other components come from. And so the question then is, of course, why can't we just carry on distilling until we get 100% ethanol, and then we don't have to worry about these? Well, it's not so easy, because there's an azeotrope, which basically means that at a certain point, at a certain ABV, you're going to end up with a mix where the boiling temperature of the mix is lower than the individual temperature of either the water and the ethanol. So you can heat as much as you like. The vapor is going to have exactly the same composition as your liquid, so you can't separate any more ethanol out. So let's look at the binary phase diagram, which illustrates this quite nicely. Let me explain a little bit. The blue line is the liquid line. So anything below the blue line is liquid. So the temperature is on your horizontal axis, and the ABV is on the horizontal, temperature is on the vertical. So if you go up in temperature, at some point you will hit the blue line. And the pink line is the dew line. So anything above that line will be vapor, and everything in between these two is a mixture of vapor and liquid that you will have there present. So let's start. Let's say you have diluted your GNS with your botanicals, and you're going to start heating, or if you have fermentation, and you're going to start distilling. What happens? You're going to raise the temperature and raise it until the mix starts boiling. So once it starts boiling, you're going to create a vapor. You could just keep boiling, and we could just keep heating and heating until we hit the pink line, but there would be not much point because we just start evaporating everything. So now what we're going to do is, as soon as we see the mixture boiling, we're going to then evacuate the vapor, and the content of this vapor, or the split of water and ethanol in the vapor, will be where the green line hits the pink one. So what we do with this vapor, we're going to condense it and evaporate it again and condense it again and again and again until we finally end up at the azeotrope where we can't go any further. And this is where we end up with the 96.4% mixture. So now let's look at what else we have in there apart from ethanol. So what's the other 4%? Well, basically mostly water. There's also some other alcohols, some high alcohols, some other chemicals. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, some of them we don't really want them in there, but some of them we don't really mind. But at the same time, if we talk about ethanol and buying ethanol and comparing ethanol, we have to talk about the same things. So the EU has issued the definition to say, okay, this is ethanol, these are the limitations for all the impurities, and if it's outside these regulations, you can't call it ethanol of agricultural origin. Let's look at these limitations. Right, I hope this is large enough for everyone to see. It's quite easy to find these online. If you're struggling with this and if you're interested in looking at this in detail, I can give you the links, that's no problem. But let's go through them one by one and see what we find on the spec sheet, so the impurity levels that you might be interested in. First of all, we have the acidity, 1.5 grams per hectoliter of 100% alcohol. This is 100% LPA, so it's pure alcohol. Acidity will be responsible for a kind of a vinegary odor. Not much to it. There's very small volume. You shouldn't really notice this when you're smelling or sniffing your ethanol. The three next ones, ester, aldehydes, and high alcohols, they're actually quite popular in certain spirits because they enhance the aroma and the flavor. Esters, for example, is very popular in rum. For example, we offer a high ester rum, and there's so many esters in, you couldn't drink it pure. Well, I suppose you could, but you would taste it for quite a long time. Not recommended. But they do add a nice character and body to the rum, if you like. Aldehydes, again, add to the aroma and flavors, but these are less popular because they seem to have an effect on the brain and might cause headaches and hangovers. They are linked with these. And then the higher alcohols, again, in certain liquids, they are quite popular. But here they are kept under a strict limitation, just to be able to make sure that we have mostly ethanol in the ethanol and nothing else. The next one, methanol, is one to be absolutely avoided. If you hear the stories about death caused by tainted alcohol or ethanol, this is the reason why. It is toxic and it will kill you. So the limitations are quite strict on this. You have to stay below 30 grams, otherwise you cannot use it in any spirit. Dry extract is more to do about the purity. That's basically what would be left if we evaporate everything. That's your dry mass or the dry extract. Again, we want to keep it as low as possible. Same with volatile bases related to nitrogen. Not very desirable or not good for the human body. And then finally, for furfural, this is a tricky one, but not a tricky one. It's in whiskey. If you like whiskey, if you know about whiskey, you know this is a very popular ingredient or addition, mostly added during the maturation in the casks. This is what brings the coconut, caramel, malty, wood flavors and aromas mostly. So it's quite popular there. In ethanol, we don't want to know about this. We say it's non-detectable. A small side note maybe about furfural, about the non-detectable. At the moment, there are technologies or there's more advanced technology that can actually detect levels. So I wouldn't be surprised in the near future that we're actually going to see a level for these as well. Then something to mention about methanol and London gin or London dry gin. You can make gin within the general spec, but if you're making London gin or London dry gin, you have to be below the 5 grams per hectoliter. So the purity is quite important. So look at your spec sheet to make sure you're in that range. Let's have a look at a few of these spec sheets. I've taken away the feedstock, just not to bias anyone. But interesting on these graphs is if you look at the esters, for example, we see a lot of difference, actually a factor 10 here, or 13 even. If you want to taste your feedstock through in your liquid, you will be looking for ethanols with the high ester content, because you will taste, for example, the potato, you will taste a little bit of cane or the sugar flavor in your ethanol before you start using it. If you want a clean palate and you want your botanicals to do the work for you, then you go for low esters, low aldehydes, etc. Another one here interesting to mention is the methanol. See the two last ones in the table. They would not be suitable for London dry gin. So yeah, keep an eye on these. Then the next group is the REN, the rectified extra neutral. In fact, it's an industrial second grade ethanol. It's as I said, it's mostly used in the industry, but also some of these are used to make vinegar, for example. Now have a look at the methanol, not suitable for beverages, or these two at least are not. A third category I wanted to mention, it's not really a category, but it's a trend, or we don't know if it's going to be a trend or not. But at the moment we have distillers, I'm talking about ethanol distillers now, and they use molecular sieves in their rectification process. So this allows them to extract a lot of water out of the ethanol, while it's still beverage. They still start from fermentation. It's all agricultural, same ingredients, except the purity is absolutely clean. This is used a lot in the pharma, but could also be used in drinks industry in the future. Who's to say? We'll find out. At the moment, it's still small. Or the supply is limited. If you are looking at your spec sheets from different suppliers, from different sources, bear in mind that these volumes, the grams or the grams per hectoliter pure alcohol, they will be different for each spec sheet. You will find all kinds of different values, if you like. It can be gram per 100 liters, microgram per liter. So you're going to have to make a few conversions to make it a fair comparison. Because as you can see in the graph above, sometimes we're talking about 100 times difference. So it's important to understand what the unit is before we start comparing these. Yeah. And of course, we touched on this slide in the previous slides. You're looking at spec sheets, you're going to decide, okay, what ethanol is right for my application. There are different ways to distinguish ethanol to divide them in different types. An application, an ABV, that's quite simple and probably not so relevant for you when you're choosing your ethanol. The more importantly are the bottom ones on this slide. So first of all, let's have a look at the feedstock. If you're looking at, say, vodka, you might want to go for a grain vodka or a potato vodka, or maybe even to make it more interesting, why not mix two different feedstocks together, and you can try different proportions, so to give a bit more character or to differentiate your product from another one. If you're looking at fortified or fortifying a wine-based product, probably you're going to go for grape ethanol. It makes sense. It's the same family. You stay within the flavor. Now, talking about feedstocks, it's all nice and well to look at all the different feedstocks there are and say, okay, I want to try this, I want to try that. But bear in mind, before you make a decision, that some of these have minimum order quantities attached to it. This is to do where they are sourced and how they are shipped. For example, cane is often traded as a commodity. So it's actually quite hard to get small quantities. It's easier to get a tanker than to get an IBC, to give you an example. Then origin is becoming very important, especially now with Brexit coming up. We have a lot of demand for UK origin GNS, which we can do, but also different origin might be attractive for different reasons. It depends a bit on your story of the product or also the product itself. Linked to this is the organoleptic properties, mouthfeel, aroma, flavor. For example, if you have tried a potato ethanol compared to a grain one, you will have a more creamy mouthfeel. It's quite distinguishable. It's quite impressive to do that and to try that. And you will have gins based on potato. Talk about origin then as well. Back to origin for a second. In East Europe, it's got a very good reputation for potato alcohol, especially Poland. They know one or two things about spuds. Having said that, there's also some excellent potato vodka and gin available, made and grown in the UK. So I don't want to take away from that. A question I get a lot is about wheat, winter wheat, spring wheat. which one is it? Which one do I want? In fact, in a very cold climate, I'm not talking about the UK now, a very cold climate, there's only spring wheat, because they have to rush the production, or the grow, if you like, So they plant it in spring and harvest it in autumn, and that's it, the cycle is done. When you have a milder climate, like in Europe, like in the UK, you can use winter wheat. What happens then is that the wheat is sown in autumn, then it grows a little bit, and then we have the vernalization process. So over the winter, the plant goes to sleep, if you like, or pauses, and then in spring, it starts growing again. The result is that you have a higher yield. There's more starch and sugars that can be extracted, so quite popular for ethanol production. There is some spring wheat in the UK as well, but this is only grown for a particular reason, sometimes for cosmetics, business, for example. Then another thing, while we are on the wheat, is the wheat. Wheat ethanol can be produced from the full grain. So you start from the full grain, mash it, ferment it, etc. But it can also be produced as a byproduct from glucose extraction, where you have the A and the B starches that are extracted first. They are easiest to take out, and then what's left is the C starch, which still can be used for ethanol production. Needs different enzymes, possibly multiple processes to extract the ethanol, but again, this is also a way to get ethanol out of the last bits of starch. Then a little word about certification. You might want to be looking at organic, fair trade, kosher, etc. By the way, non-GMO is a legal requirement in the UK, in the EU. We don't know what it's going to be after Brexit, but let's say at the moment this stays as it is. And then something else that people ask about is about gluten-free. Is your ethanol gluten-free? It is gluten-free because distillation does not transfer, or does not allow the transfer of the components that celiac people would object to. At the same time, it's impossible, or it's not allowed to certify the ethanol as gluten-free. And the reason is that you can only certify a product as gluten-free if there normally is gluten in the product. So you can't say a bottle of water is gluten-free because there's no gluten in there anyway. So you can't certify it as such. It makes more sense for a biscuit or a bread or cake or anything that you would expect to have gluten in it. So yeah. What else? Classification of ethanol. So we've seen the different types. This is classification, probably more for your records than anything else. So we've got various ways. If you're working with a bonded warehouse, you have to know the excise numbers. Then if you are, well, the tariff or tariff code is more about duty status, also about importing, exporting, and international statistics. So you've got the numbers here for ethanol. UN number is for transport. You will have seen these labels on the front or the side of the lorries that transport ethanol. If you are shipping out ethanol for some reason, there you go. There's all the classification and UN number information for your reference. Sustainability. At the moment, this is still an option, but you can imagine in the future, as there is more strain on the planet, this might be a requirement soon. At the same time, there are quite a few companies already taking part in this movement or in this subject. Sustainability is it can have different phases and different forms. A popular one is energy. This is all about renewable energy, saving power, using solar panels, recycling waste heat, for example, is also a good one that adds to sustainability. Packaging is another one that distillers look at. We've got the eco pouch, we've got refill station, cardboard dividers made from recycled products, other material that's sustainably sold, can be cork, can be labels, can be paper. So think about these things, but also ethanol. Ethanol can also contribute to your effect on sustainability. As I just mentioned, for the C starch, it's actually a byproduct. So ethanol can be made from waste products. Thinking of the way, as we mentioned before, byproduct of cheese making, but also banana, citrus, other materials can be used. There's an interesting project by RBK. They managed to make gin out of peas. And legumes, they have a different way of extracting. Basically, they extract the nitrogen out of the air, so they don't need nitrogen fertilizers. So because of this, their footprint is very, very low, and well, they claim zero, and it is a very attractive way to look at these things. And I wouldn't be surprised if in the future we see more different feedstocks making an entry under the banner of this sustainability. Some companies, they say, well, you know, we're not on a farm, we can't feed or waste the cows, etc. We don't have place for solar panels. We want to do something. So what they do is they support indirectly other organizations who take care of sustainability. So they might support charity by giving part of their revenue to them to support that cause. Or they can, for example, start with planting trees to offset their carbon footprint. So there's different ways of doing this. At the same time, at the end, after this distillation, you will have some waste, heads and tails. So Ethanol runs a scheme to collect these waste, and we are connected with recycling plants so we can reuse them and to turn them, to give them a second life under the shape of windscreen wash, cleaning products, firelighters, etc. As you see, I mentioned a few companies here with their logos. What I did is I did a very quick internet search and just see who popped up. So if you, as a distiller or as a company, if you are involved in sustainability on purpose or by accident, shout about it. Use your website, use your social channels, use the press, online, offline, because people are interested in this and they are looking for this. So if you have something to contribute, make sure they can find you. So it's a little bit of advice if you like. This is pretty much it for my presentation. Before I go, I will leave you with a few common abbreviations that we happily use in emails, and you might be confused at first because I'll tell you that there's a lot more than the ones that I'm showing here. And if I can pick out two here to highlight, is the AWRS, the wholesaler registration scheme. This, if you're going to sell to other shops or to other businesses, which probably might be your intention, you will need this. So when you're starting a distillery, think about it as well. At first, you might just sell online and it's fine, or sell to the neighbors or to individual customers. That's all okay. As soon as you get into larger business and deal with other businesses, you're going to need this. Another one is the ECMS, so EMCS, the excise movement control system. This is when you are trading from a bonded warehouse. So once you have a bonded warehouse, you apply for the bonded warehouse, you get your warehouse number, excise warehouse number, and you think, yeah, that's it, I'm registered, I've got my permit. But you also need an activation code to get access to EMCS, and some people forget this. Additionally, as a supplier from our side, if you come to us for the very first time and you want to supply under bond, we have to then make a C-check with HMRC to make sure you're approved. So all this takes time, and sometimes people are taken by surprise. So make sure you think about these things. If there's anything you want to ask about more, I'm happy to answer your questions. There will be a Q&A. But also afterwards, I'll happily leave you my details here. There you go. Feel free to get in touch, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Bert. I think it was absolutely fascinating. I've dealt with a lot of, ethanol and neutral spirits, making lots of different types of gin, and I'm still learning stuff from your presentation, so I really appreciate that. As Bert said, we've got the Q&A. It's going to be on Friday the 16th of October at 12:30 on the platform. That's UK time. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for Bert, and we'll see you on the Friday. Cheers.